but I think you could relate to this. As your company gets bigger and it changes, you lose your ability to be in the day-to-day work.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't make you a bad leader, but it kind of changes the way you engage with the work in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no question. It's funny because, I've been really lucky to have experienced, startup mentality all the way to like publicly traded private equity, all this kind of wild ass business sort of adventure, I suppose. And um I think it's difficult to like stay connected to the day to day. It really can be. Um, I think it's funny because this conversation could go so many different directions. A couple things that came to my mind when you were talking was one. I think it's really when you start your own business with your own money, right? And you don't kind of like you said, you had a big reality check of like going and doing your own thing. One thing I think when it comes to like business and whether you work for a company or you're, to what we're talking about being a leader within a company, if you start your own business and you start it with your own cash or, you're borrowing money and it's just like everything's on the line, I think that you carry that with you forever. And so even when the companies I've been involved with or started or whatever the case might be, no matter how big or small, some went out of business, some got big, but no matter what, every time I've ever been engaged with a company, even other people's companies, I look at it, I can't help myself that it's like you're scraping pennies together, you're going to go out of business the following day. So for example, I used to go to work every day, and to this day, I go to work every day like it's the last fucking day of work. Like I'm like, holy crap, if I make a bad decision today, if anything goes wrong, this might all be gone tomorrow. I come from not a lot of money, a pretty struggling background. So I always have this like heavy fear of going backwards and what that might look like. And I don't want to be there, and I don't want my employees to be there. But again, it really, to me, where I'm going with this is that it makes me always feel like I've got to stay really connected, like keep the tool belt on. Yeah, like keep your fucking tool belt on. Like don't get comfortable because you might need to reach out and grab that hammer and shit might come undone real quick. So I think anybody that takes their tool belt off and doesn't dust that shit off is like, they got another thing coming. And so I try to personally, and I've seen myself, because this has been a long road, get away from that and like loosen up the tool belt and think I'm going to set it down. And then I realize I shouldn't. So I think it's really important, and you get a lot of respect and respect, not just that you need that, by the way, because you don't necessarily need it. Staying in the trenches a bit. And I think that this is a bold statement. And I'm surprised I'm going to talk about this. I have an issue with like leaders that, sit at the end of the table, make sure, they walk in a room and you kind of already know something's up when I go to a company. This just happened recently. And I walk into, I intentionally do this, by the way. I used to sit at the end of the table, so I had that disease. I struggled, and I'd be like, "Why? How dare that person is sitting at the end of the table? Like, what? Who is this new guy? He's sitting at the end of the table. That's my seat." Like, what the hell? Like, who can think like that? I thought like that. Like, I actually had that problem. I admit it. But now I'll go to a meeting, and I just did this recently. I went to a meeting. There was like 15 people in this meeting. I walk in the room and I was a little late. I like ran to the bathroom or something and came back in, had to get my coffee or whatever. And I go in and I'm like, there's an empty seat at this end of the table here. And then there's an empty seat at the end of the table there, like one for the big guy and one for the other big guy, which is me. Right. So I walk in and I'm like, I don't want to sit there. And these people have already been trained because clearly their boss has them sitting so he can have the throne. And so immediately I was like, you guys like kind of scoot over. I want to sit like, I want to be able to see everybody, and I don't like my back against the door or whatever excuse I made up, but I didn't want to sit at the end of the table. And then the person who I just requested to scoot on, like kind of create a scoot on down situation, was pretty uncomfortable because now he's like face to face. And I'm sure his boss is like, Why is he sitting there? Why am I looking at this dude who's like whatever my my assistant's assistant, and now he's at the end of why is Johnny over there? And I just immediately like it just helps me understand the culture
Mhm.
in there, and clearly that person may have put their tool belt down.
Yeah. I got to point something out to you, and I do it, and most people do it. Is like, there's like a voice you put on when you're being like the lame version, or like that. I call it my idiot voice when I'm like, blah, blah.
Yeah,
You're like, how dare this person?
yeah. Totally.
I love the voice because it's like, you're telling a story where you're like, either like, oh God, I can't believe I acted like that, or I can't believe someone acted like that.
Yeah.
And like the voice for me is always this thing for me where it's like, whatever the people I call it my idiot voice because it's like either me acting like an idiot or someone else.
I like that.
It's like a clear differentiation of like, this is not who I am now, so I'm going to take on a different voice. It becomes a caricature where we're like, get out of here.
I gotta use that. That's an epic thing because I definitely do that. And it's funny for the record because whoever's listening to this, the person I was whatever 10, 15, 20 years ago, there's been so many cycles of who I am with business, especially, but even as an adult and a parent and so on. But I do. It's been a really interesting, sometimes shameful, and definitely embarrassing because I look back and I'm like, wow. And when you run a big company, there's so many witnesses to your idiocy, right? You're like, fuck, all these people saw that. Like, that's like if you're in a movie that's like a #1 hit and you're like, wow, that movie sucked. But it's like #1 on the box office. It's your worst thing you ever did. And you're just selling out theaters of your bad acting job. And with work, I look back on some of my most defining moments. And even like with Element, like where maybe even sometimes when it was the most successful. And I'm like, oh man, I really have well, maybe regressed. I don't know if it's evolved or regressed, but I have changed in many ways. And I laugh at it. I laugh at it. I have to laugh.
Well, dude, that's like you're figuring it out on the biggest stage, right? You're like,
Totally. It's exactly right.
it's like I'm just trying to figure out how to do this, but in front of all of you.